Q.46 What is the utilitarian perspective of political obligation? Introduction, meaning and context. Political obligation refers to the moral duty of citizens to obey the laws of the state and to support its authority. Different theories have tried to explain why individuals should obey the state. Among them, the utilitarian perspective, advanced by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, provides a pragmatic, welfare-oriented justification. The utilitarian view grounds political obligation not in divine command, natural rights, or consent, but in utility, that is, the capacity of laws and government to promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Thus, citizens are morally bound to obey the state not because it is sacred or absolute, but because obedience contributes to overall social welfare, order, and happiness. Meaning of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical and political philosophy founded on the principle of utility, meaning actions are right if they promote happiness or pleasure and wrong if they produce pain or harm. Jeremy Bentham first formulated this doctrine in his work An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, 1789, while J.S. Mill refined it by emphasizing qualitative distinctions between pleasures and linking utility with individual liberty. When applied to politics, utilitarianism holds that the state and its laws exist to maximize collective happiness, and individuals have a duty to obey the state because doing so serves that end. Core idea of the utilitarian perspective of political obligation. The basis of political obligation, according to utilitarianism, is the usefulness of the state in promoting the general welfare. People obey the state not out of fear or moral duty, but because obedience ensures peace and security, prevents anarchy and conflict, creates conditions for happiness and progress. Therefore, the state's legitimacy depends on the utility of its actions. When the state acts justly and promotes welfare, citizens are obliged to obey. When it fails to do so, their obligation weakens. Key features of the utilitarian perspective. 1. Consequentialist foundation. Political obligation is justified by the consequences of obedience. If obeying laws produces more happiness than disobedience, it is a moral duty. 2. Human welfare as the aim of law. Laws are not divine or natural commands, they are human instruments to secure the happiness of the majority. The state's authority is valid only when it serves this end. 3. Conditional obligation. Unlike absolute theories, utilitarianism advocates conditional obligation. Citizens are bound to obey only so long as laws promote welfare. If the state becomes oppressive and reduces happiness, disobedience or reform becomes justified. Secular justification. The utilitarian approach rejects metaphysical or theological foundations of political obligation. It bases obedience on reason, experience, and the collective interest of society. 5. Mutual relationship between state and citizen. Citizens obey the state because it provides security and order. The state, in turn, must govern for the well-being of the people. The relationship is reciprocal, not one-sided. Jeremy Bentham's view. Bentham argued that the purpose of the state is to create the greatest happiness of the greatest number. He held that individuals have an obligation to obey laws because laws protect them from harm and ensure public good. For Bentham, the legitimacy of government rests entirely on its utility and not on divine sanction or social contract. Thus, obedience is a moral duty only when it leads to happiness, and disobedience may be justified if laws cause unnecessary suffering. J.S. Mill's view. Mill agreed with Bentham but added a deeper moral dimension. In his view, political obligation is justified because obedience to just laws preserves liberty, justice, and moral progress. He argued that liberty itself is valuable because it contributes to human happiness and the development of individuality. Hence, political obligation is not blind submission but a rational commitment to a state that protects freedom and promotes moral and intellectual growth. Mill also warned that the state must not interfere unnecessarily in individual life, echoing his harm principle, since excessive control reduces overall happiness. Comparison with other theories. Unlike divine right theory, utilitarianism does not view the state as sacred. Unlike the social contract theory, it does not rely on hypothetical consent. Unlike Marxism, it does not interpret obligation in terms of class or revolution. It stands as a rational and empirical justification. People obey because obedience produces the most beneficial results for society as a whole. Criticisms of the utilitarian theory. 1. Vagueness of happiness. The concept of happiness is subjective. What promotes happiness for one group may cause harm to another. 2. Neglect of justice and rights. Critics like John Rawls argue that utilitarianism may justify sacrificing individual rights if it benefits the majority, undermining fairness and moral equality. 3. Short-term and mechanical outlook. Utilitarianism focuses on immediate pleasure or utility rather than deeper moral principles or long-term justice. 4. Overemphasis on majority interest. It risks tyranny of the majority, ignoring the rights of minorities. 5. Conditional loyalty. By making political obligation dependent on happiness, it provides no stable or enduring foundation for civic duty. Despite these criticisms, utilitarianism remains influential as a pragmatic and democratic theory that links political authority with public welfare. Reflection in the Indian Constitution. The utilitarian principle of promoting collective welfare is reflected throughout the Indian Constitution, especially in the Directive Principles of State Policy, Part 4. Article 38(1) explicitly states, "The state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting a social order in which justice, social, economic, and political, shall inform all the institutions of national life." This mirrors Bentham's utilitarian idea that the purpose of government is the happiness and welfare of the greatest number. Moreover, the Constitution's emphasis on public welfare, social justice, and equality in Articles 39, 41, and 47 reflects the utilitarian logic that political obligation rests on the state's commitment to maximize collective well-being. Summary. For quick understanding, the utilitarian perspective of political obligation holds that citizens must obey the state as long as it serves the general happiness and welfare of society. Obedience is a moral duty based on utility, not divine will or contract. Bentham and Mill viewed laws and governance as legitimate only when they promote pleasure, prevent pain, and ensure the greatest happiness for the greatest number. This view finds constitutional expression in Article 38 of the Indian Constitution, which enjoins the state to promote the welfare of the people. Quick revision notes. Theory: Utilitarian theory of political obligation. Proponents: Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill. Core idea: duty to obey the state arises from its utility, the promotion of happiness. Nature of obligation: conditional and welfare-based. Criticism ignores rights, justice, and minority interests. Indian Reflection, Article 38, Directive Principles of State Policy. Philosophy, greatest happiness of the greatest number. One-line questions and answers for revision. 1. Who propounded the utilitarian theory of political obligation? Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill. 2. What is the basis of political obligation according to utilitarianism? Utility, the promotion of happiness and welfare. 3. What does Bentham mean by principle of utility? Actions are right if they promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number. 4. What kind of obligation does utilitarianism advocate? Conditional, not absolute. 5. What is the link between law and happiness in this theory? Laws are legitimate if they increase collective welfare. 6. What is the major criticism of utilitarianism? It ignores individual rights and justice. 7. Which article of the Indian Constitution reflects utilitarian principles? Article 38. 8. What part of the Constitution embodies utilitarian ideals? Directive Principles of State Policy, Part 4. 9. Who refined Bentham's utilitarianism with moral and liberty-based elements? J.S. Mill. 10. What is the ultimate aim of political obligation in this view? The welfare and happiness of society. Final connection. The utilitarian perspective transforms political obligation from a matter of blind obedience into a rational, moral, and social duty based on welfare. It upholds the idea that the legitimacy of the state depends on its usefulness to the people, not on divine sanction or coercion. In India, this philosophy resonates deeply with the directive principles, which direct the state to promote social justice, welfare, and happiness for all citizens, ensuring that political power remains a means to collective well-being, not an end in itself.